Good evening. I'm Elvis Mitchell, and can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Good. I'll just do my stroke victim thing here. It'll be easy for everybody. This is going to be tough, isn't it? Well, not for me. It's an amazing movie, so why don't we just sort of get this over with, introduce our surprise guest, ladies and gentlemen, Terry Gilliam. I'm sorry, that was so heartfelt.
Are you, what, you're talking like this?
No, I always do this. Did you notice that about me?
This is going to be really classy.
Don't make fun of me. I can't help my little thing here.
I can hear myself. That's good.
Yeah. Well, I guess you once said about this movie, I guess before you got going, that it would be Quixote through the looking glass. You had no idea how deep a statement that would be, did you?
No, not at all. And I've just discovered today, thanks to Lou Pepys, that the end of the book, Quixote, the second book, there's a curse at the end of it. And I realized I'd read the book, but I didn't remember that bit. Had I remembered it, maybe we wouldn't be here tonight, and there wouldn't have been that rather wonderful documentary.
How many times have you seen this documentary now?
I don't know, I think about 4 or 5 times. I can't watch it. I don't, because it usually sends me into a depressive spin for a week or two. So I hate these bastards who made it.
But obviously they think so highly of you. I mean, that's pretty evident, isn't it?
No, it's you can't watch it because I get on with my life and I start, living a normal life again, thinking about other projects, thinking about things that I can do, and then this appears again, and it's like, I'm stuck. I've got to go back and say once again that yes, we're going to make this film, and I'm trapped.
Well, I asked the question: where is the film now?
It's we've been for the last year dealing with some German and French lawyers who represent the insurance company that ended up paying, I'm not sure whether it's $12 million or $16 million for basically nothing. And this has been going on and on and on, and we're getting very close now. At least we've got pieces of paper. They happen to be in a foreign language, but I think they relate to getting the rights back. So with any luck, it could be within the next month or so. And then the real nightmare begins. Raising the money once again and starting off on it. And then, unfortunately, the money that we had to make it, it's $32 million of non-American money, doesn't exist anymore, thanks to people like Mr. Messier, who owned Vivendi, and the German government. They've closed a lot of the tax loopholes, and Canal Plus, one of the great French financiers of movies, are practically bankrupt. So we're going to have to come to this town and beg for good old American bucks.
And based on that statement, I'm saying you're not a big fan of this town? Should I guess that?
Funny that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why would anybody be a big fan of this town?
Well, why would you not? Let me ask you that.
It's very funny. I mean, growing up here, I grew up out in San Fernando Valley. And I think it's probably because I wanted to get in movies so badly, and I couldn't get in, so I learned to hate the place from a very early age, which actually held me in good stead for years when we started making films in Britain, because we were completely separate from it, and it was like kind of saying, yeah, we can do it without you. But unfortunately, I made a couple successful films, which then encouraged me to be more ambitious and need more money. And unfortunately, this is the place that has its hands on most of the money. My problem with Hollywood is that it's a very small village, basically, of a few thousand people that are making the decisions about what movies get made and how the world is represented to both America and the rest of the world, since it dominates world cinema. And that's my problem with it. It's just, it's too concentrated. Too much power is concentrated in this one town. And everybody loses the ability or the chance to see the rest of the world represented by other filmmakers. When you think about the number of, say, foreign films or foreign language films in this country, what is it, less than 1%?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, what kind of mirror of the world is that?
Well, not only that, but that mirror around the rest of the world is reflecting America more and more, because a lot of that big money that you talk about wanting to raise overseas is used to raise movies that look like American movies.
Well, actually, strangely enough, I mean, during the 90s, really a lot of the big Hollywood movies were being funded by Germany, and that money has dried up. I mean, the 70s was kind of, Hollywood was being funded by the Arabs, the 80s were the Japanese, and the 90s were the Germans. And now, Hollywood is, I think, only waking up to the fact that that money isn't there, and they're looking for the new fool. And they haven't found the new fool yet.
So where will you look if you can't look here?
No, we'll have to look here. There's no other place to look, so we shall see. I don't even want to think about that yet. I'm trying to avoid that moment until we actually have the rights back in our head, and then it will start. But until now, I'm just concentrating on getting the rights.
Well, speaking about your being from here, I think I heard at one point that you toured the country with two very unlikely companions, Harry Shearer and Joel Siegel of ABC.
That's true. I mean, before I left the States, I mean, we were trying to get into television. We were trying to get into movies. And I've still got a little 16mm film that I made with my wind-up Bolex. It was a comic short, 3 minutes long, with Harry Shearer eating spaghetti on the roof of my house in Laurel Canyon. That was how it began. Joel and Harry were involved in the UCLA humor magazine, and when I was going to Occidental College, I was doing the humor magazine there, and that's how ultimately we met via Help magazine, which I was the assistant editor of in New York. So we became friends, and we were just desperately trying to get into movies and television. Joel did it by reviewing them, and Harry did it by doing radio, and then ultimately voices on Simpson, and on it went.
But what made you decide to leave the country eventually?
Well, I was 67. I had, a year and a half earlier, I'd hitchhiked around Europe for about 6 months, and it was one of those moments, those epiphanies, where your eyes suddenly open. You realize there's so many different ways of looking at the world. And it was like Disneyland, but it was real. I mean, there were real castles and real things. The closest I'd got to the kind of texture and detail of Europe was Disneyland, and suddenly I was in the real place, and it was far more interesting than what Disneyland could offer. It was funny because at the time, I mean, the Vietnam War was going on, and I was doing political cartoons against it. I was very much, trying to be active against it. And I got to Europe and found, of course, people there thought the war was a bad thing, and I spent my time defending America, which really shocked me. I said, it's that idea that only Americans can criticize America. You don't have the right to. Well, I felt as an American and trying to make movies, especially now when I eventually got into movies, it was absolutely essential that I didn't live in America, because at least I was able to represent a possibly slightly different viewpoint of the world. But at the time in America, I got more and more crazed about the war. I was doing anti-war posters, and I had reached that point that I thought I was going to have to start making and throwing bombs, and I thought it was better I get out for the sake of the country.
Well, it's funny you say it, though, because your movies have a real kind of anarchic spirit to them, don't they? I mean, you do throw bombs.
No, they're very anarchic. They're very anti-authoritarian. They're very all sorts of things. Some of the better ones are about my frustration and anger. Brazil, in particular, is really spewing out a lot of pent-up anger about the system. And the weird thing is, it's all come true. It's a film. It's a film about, are there terrorists? Are things blowing up? I don't know. I mean, you've got a ministry that needs terrorists to survive. I mean, if you're making bombs, what do you need? You need wars, don't you? I don't know. It just makes a kind of pragmatic, economical sense to drop bombs.
Okay.
If you make them, you got to use them. You got to get rid of the old infantry, folks.
I guess that's true. That explains Hollywood, doesn't it? I think when I think about you talking about things coming true, and I've talked with you about this before, every time one of your movies comes out, 6 months later, there's a rash of commercials imitating what you've done in your movies.
Yeah. But they've got more money and more time. They do it better. That's what makes me crazy. But yeah, it is. It's weird. Several years ago, Channel 4 in England did a program about the fact, they wanted me to be really angry at the fact that people were ripping off my ideas and using them for commercial purposes when my original ideas were obviously anti that. And I couldn't get angry because, I mean, I spent my whole life stealing from dead artists, and I thought it was only right that people stole from me. It just seems to be the way culture should work and the way, we should, use what's out there in whatever way is necessary. And then it comes back to haunt you, because when we did Fear and Loathing, off Hollywood Boulevard, there's a mural on the wall on the side of a building, a public space. And it's a mural of Dolores Del Rio. We used it in one shot in Fear and Loathing where the car drives past. The guy who did this mural threatened to sue Universal and walked away with tens and I think $75,000. And because I would thought, well, he's painted there, it's in a public space, but we're not allowed to use public space. Everything seems to be owned. In fact, if you make a movie and you feature, say, a billboard that's out there on the street that's attacking you every time you drive past it, and if I feature it in a film, I will have to pay for that or get permission for it because that space is not public. It's owned by somebody. And that's the way it works. I think the advantage of making independent films, if you can avoid the studios, you can start showing the real world and not get sued because there's no money to be sued. But anybody who owns anything out there or a billboard will try to sue the studios, and the studios will capitulate because they don't want to get caught in a long, lengthy legal case.
Well, as long as we're talking about being ripped off and that kind of thing, being co-opted. Were you ever asked to do commercials by any of these people?
Oh, yes. Yeah, and I do them every about 5 years when I get really depressed and convinced I will never make a movie again. I sell out and make a commercial and then regret it and say I'll never do this again. And then eventually the pendulum will swing back and I'll get depressed and go and sell my soul again.
What do they say to you? How do they try to entice you to do it besides throwing a bunch of money at you?
Money,
yeah.
That's how it is. And I did a Nike one a few years ago, which really made me crazy because it was basically a parody of Damn Yankees, the musical, which is about a baseball team, and the agency liked the style of sort of 1940s baseball uniforms, which that little cap with a little bill. But then they wanted this team, and the team seemed to have some Latino guys, some black guys in it. I said, hold on a minute. You want this 1940s baseball team? Don't you remember a guy named Jackie Robinson? Which they conveniently forgot. I said, there were no black players in those teams then. It took one man to break that barrier. But the commercial company knew what they were doing. They were selling to, some of their main clients were black kids and Latino kids, so they had to be included. So forget about history. We're selling things. And I went along with it. That's the kind of whore I can be. But I come and bare my soul here to people like you, knowing you'll realize that I'm a much better person than this.
I'm going to change the subject now.
So Jackie, forgive me.
Maybe he will. I guess I'm thinking, I've always wanted to ask you if you keep a dream journal, because there's so much in your movies, you talk about this anarchic spirit, but so much about the id just sort of erupting. At some point, the movies feel like that's sort of a weird term that a dream takes and it becomes bad and even worse than a nightmare can be.
No, I don't. I actually don't remember my dreams normally. I've done once or twice, I've actually written a dream when I've woken up. But I don't dream as much as I used to. That's what's odd. I think reality has taken over. If you want weirdness, reality delivers it. And it's, I don't know. I think when I get working, when actually on a project, things start happening, because just the business of doing it. And then you start expanding whatever is there, and ideas start pouring out. And if you're lucky enough, people will let you do them. But I don't really dream that much.
Was there a time, though, when you remember movies becoming a part of the way you dreamed or part of your subconscious as a kid?
I don't know. I mean, I just react to things at any particular moment. And then it goes, what is frightening is the number of scripts that I've got sitting there on the shelves that I've written, which, if I read them now, they don't make sense to me. They made sense then because they were in reaction or a representation of the way I was looking at the world that moment. As time passes on, I look at them and it's like they were written by somebody else. It's even true with the films when I look at them. It's almost as if somebody else made those films because I'm not that person anymore. I've become something less interesting, basically.
Well, what's it like for you to see Jabberwocky now, which just got re-released not too long ago?
It's kind of a weird transitional film because I was still so much involved in Python then. And so I'm doing gags and jokes and things, sometimes at the expense of the movie, I think. The best screening I ever had of Jabberwocky was for some Dutch distributors who came over to London. We had the screening at the labs, and somebody had made the mistake of not delivering the soundtrack. So we saw the whole thing without the soundtrack. And it was beautiful. It was absolutely, it was a stunningly beautiful film. No cheap jokes, just images floating and going through it. And I thought, that's a better film.
But you could say that about any of your movies, though. You could turn off the sound and watch them play out in that way. They do work in a visual, almost visceral way.
It would be nice. I keep thinking I'd love to make a silent movie just to tell the story that way. But I love verbal jokes. I love dialogue as much. So I'm caught in this trap of doing this, these sound movies. But it's like I'd love to just do a complete stream of consciousness dream movie. But I don't know. Once they take away the sound, if we revert back to pre-sound times, I can do that. So it depends on the system, the whole system to change quickly.
Have you ever seen the Jerry Bruckheimer movie? They were like, I'm sorry, that's another conversation. But when I think about something with the Fisher King, there are lots of stretches where the dialogue isn't really being that expressive. That it really is sort of like these extended sequences without dialogue. That's all this stuff playing out in his head.
Well, I suppose the main one is the waltz, which wasn't in the script. What was interesting in the script, Richard Legravenes, who wrote the script, the sequence was basically the Jeff Bridges character and Robin being in Grand Central, and Jeff had a strange kind of epiphany because there was this poor woman who began singing, and this beautiful voice floated through the thing, and commuters rushing past stopped and listened to her, and it was a very simple thing, and that's what was written. And I was trying very hard because it was the first film I'd done that I hadn't written or co-written. And so I felt terribly respectful of Richard's work and almost intimidated by it because it's kind of like, it's raising somebody else's child. He gave birth to the thing, and I was terrified that I was going to become this foster parent that abused the child somehow in the process. So I had Richard with me all the time. I would check with him before I decided to do something. But we were all at Grand Central Station on a recce, and I just wanted to get a sense of the place. And standing there and watching the people buzzing, rushing for the trains, and it was just a rhythm started building up in my head, and it went, and suddenly it burst like that, and suddenly I could hear a waltz, and everybody stopping as they passed somebody, looking and falling in love and waltzing. And I said, I sort of said that to everybody standing around, and everybody goes, "Ooh, wow, wonderful." I said, "But we're not going to do that because that would be a Terry Gilliam film, and I'm trying to make a Richard Legravenes film." And then they forced me to do it.
And you did that pretty quickly too, didn't you? Wasn't that a really fast sequence to shoot?
Yeah, we had one night in there, and that was it. We were supposed to be out of there at 5 in the morning, I think, when the first commuter trains started coming in. We didn't really get going till 11 o'clock. It was about 11 o'clock, because then we had total access. And we had all these extras, which we'd specifically asked to get these people from dance schools so they knew how to waltz. And they all arrived, 1,000 people, and we've got about 12 different choreographers to help organize the whole thing. And we get there and realize that none of them can dance the waltz. So we then spend the next several hours with the world's biggest dance school in Grand Central Station. We go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and we had the sound system that we thought would work beautifully in there. But unfortunately, the acoustics in Grand Central Station, when we played Strauss, it just went. And so we had the dance school running till about, I think it was 3 or 4 in the morning, and the first AD was not happy. The first assistant director was not happy. He wanted to get it better. And at a certain point, I said, we just got to shoot. We just got to go. We're running out of time. And so we threw all these people in there. And because the sound wasn't working, we had all the main choreographer with a big bullhorn going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And they danced. And we did a few takes. We ran around, threw Robin in, Amanda in. Amanda walks through, Robin chases. It was just madness for a couple hours. And we got it. And we didn't quite get it because the trains did arrive and people were coming out of the trains. And the PR lady from Grand Central says, you've got to be out of here. You promised you'd be out of here. And I said, yeah. And literally, I was just throwing Robin into the middle of these commuters walking through, and there weren't enough, so I get the members of the crew, keep walking back and forth. Robin, look left, look right, look up, look down, look lost. Do anything. And that's how we did it. And we got out of there today. Barbra Streisand came in a few months later and shot one shot of her, I think, walking through, and it took a week. But she got it right. That was the important thing.
Well, you rehearsed it for us, so that worked out okay. You showed her how to do it. The movie I think of yours being a real transitional film is Time Bandits. That's the one where you basically start to move away from the stuff that was sketch comedy and build characters around it.
Yeah, that was one of those moments. The reality was I was trying to make Brazil and couldn't get anybody interested in it.
How long were you trying to make Brazil?
I don't know. It'd been sort of a year I'd been playing around with it. We had our own company by that time, because with Life of Brian, George Harrison put up the money, and so Python and George became a company called Handmade Films, and so that's who we were counting on to finance it, George or whoever, and Dennis O'Brien, who was our manager, was running it. I couldn't get him interested in Brazil. And so one weekend I said, I want to make a film that, for everybody, the whole family, young and old, and came up with the idea of this gang of small bandits running through time and space. The principal idea being that you could rob and then escape to a time before the crime even was committed. And that seemed to be important. And also, it was the idea that people living in heaven weren't satisfied. It wasn't interesting enough. It was much more fun to rob and pillage through time and space. So that's how it started. And then I got Mike involved, and off we went. And it was still sketches in the sense that, it's episodes. But I think it had a line flowing through it. And it was just a wonderful crowd of people. The thing I think I learned most from was the scene with Sean Connery and the boy, because we had written clever stuff, and cleverness doesn't always work, emotionally. And Sean had just, when I first talked about it, he was saying, I can do some magic. And so basically we cut all the clever dialogue, all the cuteness out, and just had him doing a magic trick, and just his presence, and the boy became a really good scene, and probably the first attempt at being true and emotional without being cutesy and clever.
But it's also very simple too. There's no embroidery in it, and that's what I meant by that transition.
I think that was it. Because I've always learned on the job. I didn't know how to make movies. We just started making movies. We were in a very privileged position. Terry Jones and I, when Python got the money to do Holy Grail, we had never directed a film before. We just leapt into it. So each film has been my film school. I learn on the job, and you make the mistakes, and then you do something simple and realize, that's really powerful. You don't have to be clever all the time.
But also, it's obviously too about trusting yourself with actors, because the early stuff, the Pythons, those guys came in basically knowing what they were going to do and doing it. Yeah. So you didn't have to rely on a whole through line in a picture, did you?
No, that was it. It was awful working with them. They're terrible. It was the director's job on a Python film was a dog's body job. You just try to keep it together because everybody knows what they're doing. It was Jabberwocky when I worked with Max Wall in this fantastic collection of British comedians. It was when I suddenly realized that they respect the director. They don't know better. They think I know what I'm doing. And I say, lie on the ground. I'm going to cover you with all this fuller's earth. And I'm going to put an elephant on top of you. And they said, fine. And they did it. And I thought, this is fantastic. And
how long before they came to their senses?
Well, they didn't. And then you make a couple films and you get some good actors in. And the whole key about acting is you cast the right people. You cast the right actors. Then you don't have to direct. You just keep your mouth shut and hope they think you know what you're doing. And they act, and they're good.
See, I want to talk to you a little bit about that too with George Harrison, who did that same sort of thing. He seemed to trust filmmakers. I think of him as probably being one of the most influential figures in movies of the 1980s because he let filmmakers do what they wanted to do. Between what you were doing and The Long Good Friday, there's a bunch of great movies. That was a real renaissance in England in the early to mid 80s.
But it's the key to anything. I mean, and this is the problem. Hollywood hasn't learned this lesson. I mean, it's better if you could recognize talent, then you get talent in, put them in the right job, and let them get on and do the job. And it's amazing how easy it works. And yet, it's the problem in a system like Hollywood is there's so many managers, so many people that are about, that have to manage, you have to get in there and try to justify their existence. I'm really convinced that you would have just as many successful films and failures if you just had a lottery each month. Somebody takes a hat, puts all the films in, pull it out. And the only bad thing about it was some really good restaurants would close because there wouldn't be any executives to go and spend money.
What am I going to do with you up here? But that's
nobody's listening. Luckily, Hollywood isn't listening to this. We're okay.
Thank God they're not listening. No, but Harrison though was that guy, and I'm wondering because of that, if you actually thought there being a difference between an independent film or a studio film, or was it just being involved with somebody who let you do what you wanted to do?
But we were so lucky, so privileged to be in that position from the very first film, whether it was George or other pop stars that gave us the money. We were allowed to just go off and do what we wanted to do. And so you get very, arrogant isn't the right word, but you do get confident because you've made your own mistakes, you know how it works. And
do you get a little spoiled too? Is that part of it?
I don't actually think it's spoiled because, because we work too hard at our job. I mean, I'm not interested in that. Power and all those things aren't interesting. It's only the power to be able to control your work is all that interests me. And to gather a really good collection of people together and provide the arena where people can do their work as well as they can do the work. That's what it's about to me. And we were able to learn our craft in a situation like that with George providing the money or the backing. I mean, Time Bandits was... They put up the money to start it. They went out to Hollywood to hopefully raise the money. Nobody wanted to do it. They didn't like the script. It didn't go. So we made the film. George put up the money. $5 million is what Time Bandits cost. And put up the money and then came out to Hollywood with a finished film to sell it. No studio bought it. Nobody bought it. And it ended up with Avco Embassy, which was the smallest, the miniest of the mini majors. And George and Dennis, his manager, guaranteed $5 million in prints and ads. That's how it happened. It came out and went number one, and it was number one for weeks. But the system didn't like it. The system was saying, you can't do a movie that appeals to 8-year-olds and 80-year-olds, because at that point they were thinking very generically. Everybody was sectioned off. And the idea of that kind of movie just wasn't accepted, so they all said no. And it came out on a date that said, oh, you can't release a film on that date because it won't work. And I said, well, why? Because there's no competition. It seems perfect. But everybody stayed away from this jinxed date. And I said, this is crazy. There's no competition. We got to go out there. So it's very bizarre the way. Now, of course, that's not possible because every date is filled.
Sure.
Yeah, you can't move anymore if you're independent. Trying to get your film even, make anybody aware that it exists is the difficulty now. When you're up against Harry Potter, I mean, every cinema in America is playing it right now, isn't it?
Right now, absolutely. Let's all go, shall we? When you bring up Harry Potter, though, and we've talked about this before, I think about Time Bandits. I think that somehow she must have been influenced by what you did in that movie.
Yeah, I mean, when I read the script of the first one when I was coming out here to meet with certain people, J.K. Rowling has seen every Python film and show, and he's certainly seen Time Bandits and Jabberwocky, and she's fine. That's just wonderful. But she's transmuted it into something that it's its own thing. But it does have a very similar sensibility, sense of quirkiness, sense of humor, a sense of magic, and but she's made Harry Potter, and I think. She's made kids read. That's why J.K. Rowling will go to heaven. She made kids read again. It doesn't matter. I mean,
she made her read Harry Potter, so there's a
I know, but it's a start. It's just, and when you go to the last book, which is 550 pages, they said this is not going to work. Kids read it. My son, he just went through it, and I thought if you can start reading Harry Potter, you're not frightened of books. you will go to a book more bravely, more casually, and you'll discover greater and greater works.
Were you asked to do any of the Harry Potter stuff? Did they come to you?
Well, I did have to come out here and talk to certain people, but it was really because I was told that she wanted me to direct it. And so did the producer, but it was clear that I was not going to get that job because we're talking.
Really? Why was that?
I wonder. Oh, we've got a franchise there. You know, McDonald's didn't let anybody in there to make those burgers, and they're not going to let anybody in to make Harry Potter.
What a touching way to put it. God. I don't want to ask you about Brazil too in depth because you talked about it quite a bit, but how did it end up briefly with Universal? How did they end up getting their hands on it?
We actually had been out trying to sell Brazil in Hollywood with Arnon Milchan was the producer then. And Arnon was interesting because he was kind of a pirate. He wasn't liked in Hollywood. He was a bandito. And he still is, but he's now respected. But the difference is, it was really good. So he came out, and everybody turned it down, obviously. I mean, you're not going to make a film like Brazil. And then what happened was one of the studios had a film they really thought was going to be the big one. And you know, they go down lists of directors. And because of Time Bandits, I was somewhere on the list down there. And so they went through all the big names. And all of them said no. And eventually they got down to me. And I seemed to be available. And somehow what they do is not say, I've got the 13th best director to do this film. They elevate you to being the best guy, the only guy that can do it, because that's how you justify these things. So I now was elevated on the list because all the good commercial directors had passed. And then I said, well, I don't want to do this film. I know I'm now number one on your choice list, but I don't want to do it. And they said, well, why? What do you want to do? And I said, well, I've got this other one called Brazil that I want to do. So somehow Brazil, which had been rejected by everybody, became a pretty hot property because this number one director now wanted to do this thing. So it must be good. So that sort of set the stage. And then we came out we were in Cannes, and there was Universal and there was Fox because they were ones ended up getting the film. And Arnon and I were running around, and we had a budget of 12 million, and nobody was buying it, so we upped the budget to 15. Thought, you know, we'd just sort of move up to Rodeo Drive, a different class of customer. And that's what we did. We upped the budget by $3 million and ended up in Cannes with the sun beating down and the wine flowing, and us running around. We got 2 studios bidding for it, and ended up with Fox and Universal. Fox had it for the world, and Universal did it. And that's how we got it started. And then we made it. And Fox distributed in the rest of the world happily, and then we showed it to Universal. It was one of the great days. You're sitting in the Alfred Hitchcock Theater over in Universal, and it starts playing. And I do some silly intro and try to make it all light and silly and stupid.
No, what did you say though?
I don't know. I just giggle and make noises, flap my hands around, and I think he said something. Oh, it must be all right because he's kind of funny and light. And then the film starts, and I crept up into the projection booth after a while and started watching the backs of these necks. Just the tendons, the muscles were knotting. And the color was changing, was going redder and redder. And guys were going crazy. And they all come out and said, well, very interesting film. And it's and I know we're kind of doomed at this point. And they basically felt that it needed some work. It was too long. And the argument was that, you know, it needed a happier ending. And it couldn't, my good buddy Sid Sheinberg couldn't understand that we had all agreed to tell a specific tale. That you don't, at the end of the day, you don't change the story because more people might like it. That was the story. And I said, you get Jonathan, Bobby De Niro, Catherine Hellman, all these people involved because we all agreed to make that story, to tell that story. And he says, but if you change the ending, you'll get millions of more people watching. And I said, I don't care. This is the story we're telling. And if we want to tell a different story, let's make another film, Sid. And he didn't see the logic of that. And so then we got into a situation where they started cutting their version of the film. They embargoed us showing our film. we started a campaign, and because I felt it was such a total echo of what the film was about. Here was the Black Tower of Universal, which looked surprisingly like the monoliths coming out of the ground, and there was gray-suited bureaucrats hiding behind corporate responsibility, and so I decided I had to do a personal campaign to flush out the real man, and so I don't know, you probably know it. I mean, I did the added variety with the black border, like obituary notices in Italy, and this big blank page in the midst of all those pages full of numbers and zeros and dollar signs, and there's this blank page, and neatly in the middle, "Dear Sid Sheinberg, when are you going to release my film Brazil?" Signed Terry Gilliam. It seemed a reasonable request.
And subtle too, which
subtle
worked.
and polite.
Yes, I think
polite.
So. Yes, yes.
And that started this huge campaign.
And surreptitiously showing it to the press too.
Yeah, and that's what happened. And people started seeing it. A man named Jack Matthews, who was writing for the LA Times, got onto the story, and he maintained a dialogue between me and Sid. And Sid and I never spoke again, but Jack would report what I just said to Sid, and Sid would respond, and then he would tell me what Sid said, and then I would respond. And I was keeping it light and funny, and Sid, of course, had corporate responsibility to deal with. So it very quickly looked like David versus Goliath, the artist versus the system, and it got enough attention that we were able to get the LA critics to start these series of clandestine screenings of the film. And then they discovered that the bylaws didn't say the film actually had to be released. And then they voted it. And it was The Night Out of Africa, premiered in New York. And that was Universal's big film that year. Redford was there, Meryl Streep, the whole gang were in their black ties in New York. And the LA critics announced their films of the year. Best Picture, Brazil. Best Screenplay, Brazil. Best Direction, and shock horror. They didn't know what to do. They had to release the film. They released the film in 2 cinemas, one in New York and one in LA. They didn't have any posters because all they had was Xerox copies of some artwork that they had prepared, and it was out there. And then the stupidity of the whole thing is that the big cities had been following this battle, this public battle. I mean, I went on American television because De Niro was wonderful, because Bobby never promotes his own films, and he came on knowing that we would get on the big shows. And we were on Maria Shriver's show, and Bobby's there, and she asked him a couple of questions, he answers, and then she says, "I understand, Terry, you've got a problem with the studio." And he said, "I don't have a problem with the studio. I have a problem with one man. His name is Sid Sheinberg, and he looks like this." And I pulled out an 8x10 glossy. and it was the only way to do this battle. And it was funny, but it was also terrifying. That's when I did a commercial at that point, too. I really was convinced we were never going to pull this thing off, but we did. But the terrifying thing, and this has been a film where, the head of the Studio 3, Lou Wasserman, Frank Price, and Sid Sheinberg had all publicly said this was unwatchable. This was, this was not a film, unreleasable. These words were used. And now, because in the New York and LA cinemas, it did per seat the biggest business all over the Christmas holidays. So they suddenly thought, we've got maybe a hit film on our hands. We don't understand what it is, but somehow the public like it. Well, what they didn't understand was only the big cities knew about the battle, so they were the only ones with any interest in seeing what this thing was. And they put it out into all, in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, places that had no idea of it. And there's a film called Brazil. Why am I going to see, a travelogue? I'm not going to spend my money on that. And nobody came, obviously. But the film was out. And in the end, that's all that's also be important. The films get out. They become artifacts. They exist. DVD, VH, everything goes on. And they find their own life.
It's so interesting because you ended up in a kind of circular logic back at Universal making 12 Monkeys.
The irony was too great to say no. I read that script, I said, there's no way we can get it, but it's already in the system. And so we really had to make it. To be honest, it was made because, Bruce Willis agreed to do it. It was as simple as that. It wouldn't have been made unless we had gotten a big star. And it just was one of those wonderful convergences of what we were trying to do and what Bruce was trying to do. And I think at that point he was trying to prove he was a good actor, that he was a serious actor. He wasn't just making big action movies, and he wanted to do it. He wanted to prove to the world that he could, was a good actor. And I had met him when we were doing Fisher King, and I liked him. I was intrigued because there was the scene in Die Hard, the first Die Hard, there's a moment in there where he's in, I think, the toilet after every bit of glass has been blasted out of the place, and he's picking glass out of his feet, and he's on the phone talking to his wife, and he's crying. And I said I thought that was a really wonderful moment, because you've never seen an action movie with the guy, the macho man, weeping like that. And he said it was his idea, and I thought, well, this guy is more interesting than he lets the world see. So we went to New York. Chuck Roven, the producer, and I went to New York and said, if you want to do this, you've got to come as Bruce Willis, the actor, not the superstar. You can't have the entourage. We're not going to pay you any money. You'll work for scale. And that's it. And he did it.
And you gave him a specific piece of direction too, right?
Oh, well, yeah, this is, again, I think Jonathan Pryce will vouch for me, my directorial skills with actors. I basically said, you can't do that steely eye thing you do. You can't do that, there's what else? The steely eye, the smirk, and you can't do that little moue you do when you get nervous with your mouth. And that was it.
Seems to work.
It worked. It's almost sometimes, it's almost as simple as saying don't do certain things, which allows somebody the freedom to get on and explore other areas. I've always worked on the principle, by saying and doing the things I do, a lot of doors close for me, which is good. So the choice of doors to go through becomes less. Life gets simpler.
Well, what do you tell actors? I mean, you brought up Jonathan Pryce. What did you tell him for Brazil? What was your direction to him?
And I thought the whole thing with Jonathan was to keep his voice high, because his voice, when it drops down, it becomes incredibly powerful and intimidating, and just keep it light. I think that was it.
Okay.
I mean, I don't have to do it anymore. I mean, Jonathan's brilliant, and the fact is, we get on. We're very, you've got to get on with the actors, sure. And then it just becomes. To me, it's just being a support mechanism. When they're funny, you laugh. When they're tragic, you cry. And make it feel comfortable and safe so they can make fools of themselves. Because I think acting is terrible, because you're totally naked when you go out there. And to do any really good performance, you really just give it all. And so there's got to be that business of trust. I mean, Ian Holm in Brazil, it's interesting because he was Napoleon in Time Bandits, and he was very controlled when we did that, because I didn't know him, he didn't know me. And so it was very, very precise, very controlled. And by the time we got to do Brazil, I think he trusted me. And he was all over the place. He was taking chances, which means you fall on your face a lot. But he trusted me not to use those bits. Leave in the good bits, and there's this really intriguing performance. It's very unlike what he normally does.
One of the things I thought you got from the Pythons is just putting a group of people together who trust each other, building that kind of sense of trust and confidence you get in an ensemble, and working from that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key. I really do think it goes through the whole, everything about a film, all the departments. The more you get a sense that everybody's trusting each other, they're not going to be condemned if they make a mistake, because that's what everybody is most frightened of being, bollocked for making a mistake. No, you try to get over that. I mean, I have a thing about, in films, because of all the departments, there's a lot of empire builders, and I get really obsessed with that, and I don't let doors get shut on offices. I want everybody sort of mixing in. I want everybody looking at what everybody else is doing and learning. So you get a sense of the film rather than all these little boxes of people working separately and doing their own thing. I try to convince everybody that we all are sacrificing ourselves for the film. That's the only thing that counts. And I keep saying, if I get in the way, fire me. Just get me out of the way if I'm in the way of the film. But it's trying to get everybody to agree the film we're trying to make at the beginning. And if we all choose to go down that road, we can take all sorts of strange paths, but we're all heading to the same direction. And then you get interesting films, I think.
Well, let's open some doors up here. I'm sure you guys have some questions. And do we have microphones here? How are we doing this? Okay. Well, if you've got questions, you can sort of step down to the spotlight, the lonely spotlight.
Oh, this is intimidating.
The walk of shame down to the front. Oh, and there's a volunteer.
We're not going to laugh at you, no matter how big a fool you make of yourself.
It's that trust he's talking about.
Yeah, we're supporting you. We're with you. Just relax.
It's that direction of his.
See how successful
it's working already.
Excellent direction.
Yeah.
Hello?
Sure.
Is this working?
Yeah.
You've been through so many ups and downs in your careers, and you've had a lot of nightmarish experiences. How do you keep yourself sane?
I've never been sane, so I don't have this problem.
Well, you must have. I mean, it must have been just so devastating what you went through with Man
I
of
don't
La
know.
Mancha.
I just. My mother's here. I think she's actually a rubber tree plant, so there's a lot of bounce in me. I don't know. I don't know how. I mean, there's a lot of other things in life besides movies. Is how you do it. That's how you do it. I live in London, a long way away from this place, so I can, I can read books. I can get on. I've got a house in Italy. What I really do is build stone walls. I put one rock on top of another rock. It really works. It's as simple as that.
So you don't close doors, but you build walls.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I mean, I'm just lucky. Maybe it's my true American spirit.
But that actually begs a question, though, that making each movie must be kind of devastating in some way. It must take a lot out of you, doesn't it?
Yeah, I know, they kill you. That's what they do. I mean, little by little, but without them, life would not be very interesting. There's nothing else I do particularly well now. I keep thinking about what job could I do if I didn't do films, and there's not much anymore.
Do you miss cartoons?
Not really, and the only cartooning I really do is like birthday cards for the family, things like that. And storyboards. And then it's nice when somebody animates them so beautifully. They look really good.
Mr. Gilliam, first, I just want to tell you, you're my favorite director of all time, anywhere. And second...
That's why we hired him. You cast the right people, and everything flows beautifully.
Quixote aside, if you had $35 million, would you make Good Omens next, or are you still locked into Brothers Grimm?
Well, Good Omens doesn't seem to be coming together. It's a very weird time. And Brothers Grimm has some momentum, and momentum is kind of everything at this point, so I'm riding that one for a little bit. I mean, I was involved in another project, Blue Ribbon Operation, which somehow the momentum faded away. It's a weird time, and I just feel if anything is moving forward, grab that, because starting from scratch is very difficult, because some of the Good Omens was developed outside of the studios and trying to get it in there, because they've got so many other things they've already spent money on that they would like to somehow get made, and Brothers Grimm is one of those. So I hope it goes forward. I don't know. I mean, I'm only actually involved for about 8 weeks to see if we could cast it, budget it, do all the things, really prepare it, and then see what it's going to cost and whether they'll go.
Most possible at this time?
Sorry?
Is that the most possible at this time?
Yeah.
Is that top of your list?
That's all I can say.
Thanks.
Though, talk a little bit about what Good Omens is about. It's Neil Gaiman's work.
Yeah, I mean, Good Omens was a book that Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett wrote. Terry Pratchett isn't really known in America, but he outsells... Is he? Good. I mean, he basically outsells J.K. Rowling, I think, in England. I mean, his books are incredible, but for whatever reason, he hasn't done that well here. He and Neil wrote a book called Good Omens, which is about a devil and an angel. And the devil was the snake in the Garden of Eden. The angel was the angel with the flaming sword at the gate. And they've been hell and heaven's representatives on earth for the last however many thousands of years, depending which religion you are. And and they've gone a bit native. They actually like humanity. They divided up the place. They don't interfere in each other's affairs too often. And the beginning of the book and the beginning of the film, the Antichrist is delivered, which means, depending which prophecy you believe, 10 or 11 or 12 years, it's Armageddon, the apocalypse, and heaven and hell will have a big battle and sort out once and for all who's going to win. And they decide they don't like this because they don't want the earth destroyed. So they agree to work together to raise the Antichrist, and hopefully the angels' good intentions will somehow soften the others. So they raise the child, and on his 10th or whichever birthday it is, 11th or whatever, a hellhound is to be delivered. And he's going to name that hound, and it'll tell the angel and devil whether they've succeeded. Is it going to be, like Spot, or is it going to be rips your throat out by night? It's just, and unfortunately, the hellhound doesn't turn up, and they suddenly realize they've raised the wrong kid. There had been a there had been a switch at the convent where he was born, and they've raised the wrong one. And somewhere in England is the real Antichrist, and they've got to try to find him and hopefully stop the end of the world. Unfortunately, we went to Hollywood November last year, and I guess Armageddon was not on the list of films we should be dealing with.
Probably not.
Bad timing.
No, especially as a comedy. Yeah.
I'm curious about the impossible shots, the scenes you can't possibly get done, but you do somehow. Like in Baron Munchausen, there's a scene where they've filled up the knickers with hot air, and they're going to fly above the gates and escape the Turks. And I read once, I don't know if it's true, that the film almost train wrecked over that scene, that you couldn't get it filmed, you kept trying, it didn't work, it didn't work, it didn't work. At the end of the day, finally, everything came in line, and there's a beautiful sunset, and the ship flies over. So, do you recommend trying to film the impossible shots in the beginning of the shoot or late in the shoot? If you do it late in the shoot, they might cut it, but if you do it early in the shoot, the film might go. So, what do you do?
I know. There aren't any rules in this one. I know because there's a lot of people that do it. They leave out the key shots till the end. So they know the film will not be able to be cut together without those shots. So I don't know. I never plan it that way. I just go in and do it, and we try to, to schedule the thing in the most sensible way. That's all. I've never played the strategic game of that. And I mean, it's sometimes you try to do difficult things at the beginning when you're fresh, but sometimes they're easier at the end when you've been in the film for a while and you've got the rhythm of the crew together. So there's no way of really working this one. Maybe it's just not to try those kind of shots ever, and just do nice, safe little films with 3 people sitting in a room talking.
I guess I wonder, though, do you ever get obsessed with a shot and feel you just got to get it and it doesn't matter what cost?
Not really. No, I've always had to be fast on my feet because we've never ever had enough money to do things really properly. So after a certain point, you start giving up on it. You say there must be another way around it. I don't think, I'm trying to think of one that I would have killed and shot for weeks to get it right, and I don't. I've never had that luxury of time. So there's always the pressure, okay, we got to get off. Whatever it is, we stop now. There's this shot in Munchausen, which I think it's a stunning shot. It's when they're going to the moon, and the ship is being thrown about on the waves, and suddenly it all calms down, and we see that shot of blackness with stars twinkling, and then the boat comes in, but it's coming at an angle. It's just completely wrong, and the water, you realize it's water, and it drains away into the sand. And we did that, and it's a stunning shot, but we actually stopped at a certain take and said we can't do any more. And if you look closely at that shot, look ahead of the boat, and you'll see in the sand a line, and it's the wire pulling the boat. But nobody sees it. That's what's so weird. They're looking the other way. It's like magic. It's misdirection.
Yes.
You're doing that. In fact, this is the hand that's doing the work. And it's happened in every film I've done. There's 1 or 2 shots that, if you really look at it, it's a disaster. There's one in Jabberwocky where this Black Knight swings his axe and falls off his horse. And the shot, 2/3 of the frame is the side of the prop truck. And you don't see it because your mind will not accept there's an aluminum-sided prop truck in the middle of this, in the Middle Ages. And we blew up the shot at one point because I was going crazy. It was the only shot we had. And I blew it up, and somehow blowing it up drew more attention to it. But it works. And there's in Munchausen, there's a shot with a guy with a T-shirt on with something about New York on it.
Yeah.
And I never saw the shot for all the hundreds of times I've watched the film, and it took some geek nerd jerk.
Get out right now. Get out of here.
Who's got nothing better in his life to do but sit there frame by frame going through this movie.
Yeah,
and
they call him film critic.
Did you see it? Oh Jesus, Elvis. Oh, God.
I wanted to ask you about animation. You started out in animation, and you were always influenced by old Disney films, I remember reading. But now with you've gotten to realizing your ideas in live action in the realistic way. How do you have any thoughts about the new computer animation is looking pretty good, and they're getting the textures and realism of live action into them? Would you ever consider doing more animation features in the future?
No, I've always avoided it because I mean, animation is a long, slow process, and I just don't. And if I did it, I wouldn't be doing it in a realistic way. I don't see the point in it. I mean, realism is what we're doing when we're doing live action films. Animation, I love the fact. That's what I love about South Park. I mean, it's so crude, and it works because of that. Because if they tried to make it naturalistic, it wouldn't work at all. Stay within this other world. It's like puppet shows. Puppets work because they're puppets. They're abstracted things. Cartoons work because they're abstracted. And I think some of the mistake is people are trying to do more and more realistic films. Now you can do almost all of those things with real people now. Just real people are more complicated than cartoon images that you can push around. I mean, that's why if you look at, Prince of Egypt, where they tried to be realistic in a sense. They tried to have all the nuances of a character. It's kind of embarrassing, to be quite honest. Especially when the whole religion is based on this bush burning in this cave. And you think, I don't know, the Egyptian religion looked a bit more sensible than this one. Now, you can do a burning bush in the Bible, and you can do it as metaphor, you can do it anything, but suddenly when you put it in this cartoon, like, what is going on here?
Thank you. Thank you. Last question.
Terry, I think I speak for everyone here when I say that you have accomplished so much in the realm of fantasy, and you have such good instincts for the fantastic in your films, and also realism as well. But certainly, after you look at the success, the spectacular success of Jackson's Lord of the Rings film and what is yet to come, have you ever thought about, maybe I should pick up a trilogy, or, oh, look, here's the Chronicles of Narnia. Maybe I could pick up Asimov's, Foundation, trilogy. Maybe you'd like to pick something up like that, and maybe do 3 or 4 films and like a big, you know what I'm saying? Has that idea ever turned you on? The instant franchise?
You don't happen to be running a studio in Hollywood, because I mean,
No.
if just one of those guys would suggest that, I might do it. But they don't seem to come forward and they don't come forward with those ideas for me. No, I don't think I'd actually want to do a trilogy. Anyway, once is enough on a thing. My versions are like, I always said Time Bandits, Brazil, and Munchausen were, well, there was, actually Munchausen was the 4th part of my trilogy, is what I said. But but I'd rather do that. I don't think I mean, Peter Jackson is doing it, and he's doing a brilliant job, I think. And I don't even want to try to compete with that. I'd rather make 3 individual, very different things, to be quite honest.
Okay.
I guess I thought you meant that thing on purpose with the truck and Jabberwocky. Now I feel stupid. But all your movies are playing with time, and what fascinates me about them all is they feel anecdotal when in fact they're not. Each of these anecdotes is building towards a narrative point.
Yeah.
And how conscious are you of that, or is that unconscious?
No, it's total. No, I mean, I'm able to fool myself into thinking I know what I'm doing when I set out to do something. I don't. Maybe I don't. Maybe that's the interesting thing, is maybe you see more depth to my work than I do.
Hey, I saw the T-shirt. This man just got off a plane to get here. He said he was knackered, but you'd never know. So let's thank Terry Gilliam for being here.
Okay.